Hey everybody, this is Mike with On Point Preparedness. This video is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be faith-based, but it is also going to be about physical preparedness. Actually, I have not done one of these videos in quite a long time. I think it's been over a year at least. Honestly, this is how my channel started. I have been physically prepping for, last 12, 13 years. And so, I am not the utmost expert on preparedness, but, for doing this for so many years, I believe I've at least, garnished some good ideas that I can help pass along to you. But I entitled this Christian Preparedness, not just for clickbait or anything of that nature, but to really make sure that we put prepping in the context of faith and what is and is not appropriate. Because there's a lot of prepping channels out there. Again, ones that are probably way better than the information that I have. And so you all can find those homesteader channels, the survival channels. You guys can get lots of good information. But there's not a whole lot of people that are putting it in the context of making sure that your preparations are in accord with the faith. So what I want to do today is we're going to go through some scripture. I've got maybe about 15 minutes of scripture that I want to look at, and then go through a whole bunch of ideas in terms of how you can prepare for what's coming. So let me switch on over here to the screen share. And, I pray that a lot of people will stay here for the scripture, but I know there's going to be a lot of people that just want to skip over onto like the physical preps. But again, here's all the stuff that we're going to cover from like a physical preparation standpoint. I'll tell you why I have it organized as such. So there's going to be lots of good information in here. I never promote my Amazon affiliate link because, again, I think that's a stumbling block to some regarding the faith if someone's always trying to promote themselves and always trying to make money. But full disclosure, I do have my Amazon affiliate link in the YouTube description box. So, it helps me. This is the only time I'm really going to mention it other than just having it passively on my website. But, if you use that link and you see something that's a good idea that you might want to buy, again, there's an affiliate commission that comes through if you use that link below. So let's go on over to the scripture first, because, again, that is, as you'll see, the first and foremost thing that we as Christian preppers, we need to be focused on. So I want to start with Luke chapter 12, and it's really about not having anxiety about what you're going to eat or just the things of this life. But again, this is about having anxiety about preparation and having something to eat. This does not mean that you shouldn't be doing these things at all. Because there is an argument, I don't know how common it is, but some will say, if you're prepping and you're not trusting in the Lord, you should be relying on Him for, to provide for you. And that's true. Ultimately, everything comes from the Lord. But however, there's always a balance, and it doesn't just apply to preparedness, it applies to anything. There's always going to be a balance between what God does and then what He has us do in all sorts of things. And so, that's one argument. Some will say you're not trusting in the Lord. That's absolutely false. And then another one, there's obviously this position of pre-tribulation rapture. I'm not a proponent of that. I believe that we are raptured prior to wrath. So I do believe that it makes sense to have some preparations. But some will say, it's you might as well not even do it because it's not worth it. There's going to be trouble unlike the world has ever seen before. So why are you even trying to do anything? Again, that's I don't think that's really a proper way to look at it as we look at some of the scriptures. We are told to provide and to prepare for our families. We're told and commanded to prepare for the poor. So again, just to say, oh, it's going to be so terrible, you might as well not even do it. I don't think that's a very good rebuttal as well. So let's get into Luke 12. It says, and he said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on, your shelter. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Oh, of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? And consider the lilies, how they grow, they neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried, for all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. So again, context is, don't be anxious about these things. And that's going to tie into how we're supposed to look at all these preparations that I have set before you. Don't be anxious about these things, but instead seek first the kingdom of God, and then these things will be added to you. So this chapter, or this segment of this chapter, is not saying do not prepare at all. Because again, there are other verses and there are other situations in the Bible where God has explicitly told the saints to prepare. There's examples of obviously Noah building the ark. Obviously, there's bigger spiritual connotation of those stories than just the building of the ark. There's a lot of typology there. But Noah building the ark, Joseph storing grain for 7 years. There's also passages in Acts where prophets had foretold of a coming global famine, and then the saints provided for the poor saints that were in Jerusalem. So again, we have to not just look at this one section of scripture and say, prepping is bad, don't do it at all. In context, we see preparation all throughout the Bible and the need to prepare for your family, but it has to be in the right context. You can't be anxious on it. You can't be overly focused on it, which is a huge danger, which I'll get to in terms of preparedness. And always be seeking God and the things that add to the kingdom before these things. So that's the context. Now, I wanted to mention it's very easy to fall into bondage. It can actually be like slavery. Again, I've been doing this for 12, 14, who knows how many plus years. And I've gone through ups and downs with this because I've been saved since 2015. So I've been prepping before I was even saved. But after I became saved, my conflicting thoughts either accused or excused me, as we'll look at the scriptures which state that. Sometimes there's so much preparation to do, and the time seems very short, and you may have loved ones that you're caring for, that it just gets completely overwhelming. And then you're actually not in accord with Scripture. You're starting to get anxious. I know a lot of people are feeling anxious right now when you're seeing not the whole world, well, all of mainstream media is talking about global famines. You hear about the latest reports of this factory fire, that factory fire. Fuel prices are going up. Fertilizer prices are going up. The war is, not allowing grains to be exported. There's export bans. I mean, there is no shortage of bad news. You need to keep guard of yourself in regards to Luke chapter 12. That your focus on preparations does not take precedent over, the Great Commission and growing in faith and seeking the Lord. Because when you start to focus on all the different preparations you need, and you don't even know really what you need, right? It depends on your living situations. It depends on exactly what happens, earthquake, war, famine, who knows what. As you look through all these different aspects of preparations on what current commodity or what current thing that we have today that might not be there, what do I need to do for this and that and whatever, there's a lot of different things to prepare for. And there's knowledge and supplies that have to go into each one of those segments. And that will just blow your mind apart if you focus on it too much. And I've been there. It's like, how I gotta, communications, ham radio. Well, then you gotta study up on all this ham radio. And then, gardening, all the knowledge with gardening, or hunting, all the knowledge with hunting. You can't do it. And a lot of preppers acknowledge this as well. And again, they're completely focused on the prepping. They're not focused on the faith. they'll say, well, that's why you need community. You can't do it all yourself. That's why you need someone that specializes in farming. That's why you need someone that specializes in this and that and whatever. And that's all good and everything like that. But if you don't have faith, everything's going to break apart. It really is. So number one message, do not fall in bondage to preparations, because it's extremely easy to do. I've been there multiple times. Just go about it calmly and patiently, regardless of what crazy is going on in the world. All right, moving on. Just a couple examples. I gave it in my last video. The Lord will provide correction if you do start to go astray. So, and again, I still struggle with this. I still struggle with it because of all the massive headlines that are coming out today. I mentioned once, I was really into preparedness and probably thinking about it a lot more than I should have. And then I got some digestive virus, which then caused me to have an autoimmune condition. And I couldn't eat wheat. I couldn't eat nuts. I couldn't eat a lot of grains, maybe just rice a little bit. I lost like 15, 20 pounds in a month. And suddenly all my preps didn't matter. I couldn't eat them. And I can't recall, I don't think I was saved at the time, but obviously after I became saved, I thought back and I recollected to that event. And it puts things back in perspective. The Lord can, discipline you and say, you know what, you need to focus on what's important. So I know there's other people that have written me where the same thing happened to them, where they had some autoimmune condition pop up where they couldn't eat what they prepped for. Other things that have happened to me, mice get into the preps, bugs get into the preps, things like that. And I started to feel an internal conviction that, okay, maybe the Lord is saying, you did enough. We have to be, we have to take notice. We have to be sensitive to these things. Not everything bad that happens to you is an attack from Satan. You have to actually think about, is the Lord trying to speak through me or speak to me through this unfortunate circumstance? Other things as well. You may have loss of a loved one, or you might get some terminal disease, and then suddenly that's your worst threat. Everything going on in the economy and everything isn't, and suddenly the Lord shifts your focus. I know that has happened where I don't know if they were of the faith or not, but there were prepper channels. There was actually a guy, I forget what he had porch talk. His name was Howie. Him and his wife, lovely couple. I forget what their YouTube channel was. Howie always did these porch talk sessions, and he was always talking about prepping. He was also always talking about faith, and he got COVID and he succumbed to it and died. And so, again, we can make all these preparations and stuff, but no one knows their hour. Obviously everything he did is still helping his family because they're still around. But again, you don't know your hour, so the best thing to do is focus on the Lord. All right, moving on. I just wanted to highlight this one story about Elijah and how the Lord commanded him and said, "Go to this place, and you will drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there." And so the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank from the brook. So, a lot of people also say, don't worry, especially if you don't have the means to prepare. The Lord could even go to the extent of using the beasts of the earth to help feed you, or like in the Exodus story, there was literally quail that came and fed the Israelites, or the Lord is convicting someone like me or someone that has the means to prepare to store extra, and the person that doesn't have the means to, the faith that the Lord is giving them is to be still. I've mentioned this several times, but for anyone new, the Lord is telling the person who doesn't have sufficient funds to be still. I will provide for you. And he brings the faith of the one who has prepared, along with the person of the faith that was to be still. And, he makes them meet together, and you're taken care for. You have to rely on your faith. If you start going against your conscience, which is what we're going to look at here soon, if you're going against your conscience, that means maybe you're saying, oh, I need this huge solar panel setup, and it's going to cost like X number of $1,000, and you go against your spouse or, you start doing shady stuff, again, the Lord's going to correct you in that. So again, don't succumb to just the fear and anxiety part of it. All right, now looking at some other scriptures, just talking about general prudent nature of providing for your family and prepping. 1 Timothy, whoops, jumped off the screen here. 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Paired with Proverbs 27:12, the prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. Again, the unsaved people of this world, everyone's seeing it. It's talked about on mainstream media. We see the danger on the horizon. And so just basic prudent nature is to say, I think we should be storing some things up. There's obviously countries that are going through some really rough times. I think we should be prudent and just do a little bit of preparation. So again, there's scripture to support that. There's also times in the Bible, like I talked about Noah or Joseph storing grain. In Acts 11, which is a more recent example in terms of New Testament, in Acts 11, 27 through 29, it says, Now in these days prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch, and one of them was named Agabus, stood up and foretold by the Spirit that there would be a great famine all over the world. This took place in the days of Claudius. So the disciples determined, everyone according to his ability. So again, there's a conscience part of this. Just because you see someone doing X amount of prepping and they're storing this length of food does not mean you should do it. It's according to your ability, which links to your conscience, right? Everyone has a variety of different funds and things like that, so they're all doing according to their ability and their conscience to send relief to the brothers living in Judea. So I'm sure that they're prepping locally for themselves, but again, the highlight here is that they were sending food and relief to the brothers living in Judea. This is not the only time that relief was sent to Jerusalem and Judea. In Romans chapter 15, it says this also. At present, however, I'm going to Jerusalem bringing aid to the saints. For Macedonia and Achaia, may I say that wrong, have been pleased to make some contribution for the poor among the saints at Jerusalem. For they were pleased to do it, and indeed they owe it to them. For if the Gentiles have come to share in their spiritual blessings, they ought to be of service to them in material blessings. So again, context here is you need to be focused on others. And you should rehearse this in your mind and be praying to God that when famines come, and the Bible foretold and prophesied of famines, that God gives you a soft heart and that you're able to give. Because I'll tell you what, your flesh is going to want to keep it. Your flesh is going to want to not tell anyone, because that person is going to tell another person, is going to tell another person, and everyone shows up at your door. That's what your flesh is going to do. You have to pray beforehand, and you have to think beforehand about, God, please, protect me from being raided, but soften my heart so that I give with a joyful heart. Because again, that really is the context of this verse, and that is foremost the most important thing. I mentioned, it keeps on going up to the page. Talked about conscience a little bit as I read some of these verses, and so that's where I want to get into this last section before we start to get into the physical preparation ideas that I have for you all. Prepare accordingly to your ability and faith, and don't compare yourself to others. You have to prepare according to the faith that God has given you. If you start to feel anxious, if you start to have conflicting thoughts, that's where you need to take pause and talk to God. Seek counsel with God in terms of what he thinks or what he wants from you to do. So Romans chapter 14, the faith that you have. Now this is all about, something's wrong with my page where it keeps on jumping up to the top. This is about food, clean and unclean meats. However, I detail this in this video, When Christian Liberty Kills Sins of Conscience. If you don't know what that means, I suggest you go to my YouTube channel and search this and find out, because it's a very important, fundamental aspect of the faith, the law of liberty. We're not under the law of Moses. everyone's faith is different for certain things. There's some universal things, like obviously murder and stealing and things like that. But there's some things in terms of like drinking alcohol, whilst, not talking about being drunkenness, but drinking alcohol in moderation. That could be a sin or could not be a sin depending on the person. What type of meat you eat, that can be a sin to one person but not to another. That's what this chapter is speaking to. But it applies to any type of issue where you may have a violation of conscience. And I think this prepping aspect is one of them. Romans 14 says, "The faith that you have, keep between yourself and God. Blessed is the one who has no reason to pass judgment on himself for what he approves. But whoever has doubts is condemned if he eats." Again, this is talking about meats only. "Because the eating is not from faith. For whatever does not proceed from faith is sin." And if we look at Romans chapter 2, I think this complements those verses where it says, "For when the Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they don't have the law." Talk about the law of Moses. "They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts, while their conscience also bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or even excuse them on that day when, according to my gospel, God judges the secrets of men by Christ Jesus." So again, our conscience is very, very important as it relates to prepping and our faith in this matter. You're going to go through these hills where, am I doing too little? Am I doing too much? Should I buy this? Should I not buy that? And again, we're going to have these conflicting thoughts. We're wrestling with God. We should be wrestling with God on these things. We shouldn't just be going gung-ho, not thinking about God, getting everything we can. You need to be seeking the counsel of God throughout this whole entire process and making sure that you're not getting out of balance. So, again, prepping, I think, is generally wise. It's prudent. Even those that are unsaved see it and are doing so. I also think that we have, especially in Acts, a conviction from the Lord to prepare. And certainly in Revelation, famine, pestilence, and lots of different things are promised. But again, don't be in bondage to your preps, because, as I mentioned, there could be a multitude of other of things where the Lord really sets you straight to keep your focus on Him. What if all your preps go up in a fire, house fire? What if you get cancer or some type of terminal illness, or like that autoimmune disease that I had? There's a lot of things that can completely turn your world around, where your preps don't really matter so much. All right. Hope that was helpful, to keep this really grounded in the faith. But with the last segment of this, I want to go through just ideas for physical preparedness. There is a lot of different circumstances that we're in terms of financial security, where we live. You're either in an apartment in a city, or you're in the suburbs, or you're in rural life. Some people have families, small children, some people don't. This is just going to be how to think about preparedness overall in terms of a hierarchy, in case you haven't done anything at all or very little. That's the number one build that you can get off of this, is how do I think about this holistically? Because again, some people might be a little bit too overwhelmed, and this helps condense it a little bit better. That's the number one thing I want you to get out of this. And number two, you can glean off of some of my examples. It's not going to be an entire list. I just threw this together over the last couple days. You can say, oh, that's a good idea. Well, that's a good idea. Maybe I'll get that. Maybe I'll get that, whatever. So those are the two takeaways from this section. All right, so in the prepping world, there is this 3-3-3 rule, 3-3-3-3 rule, where it says you can live 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. And so as you think about putting together a bug out bag or something like that, people will say, look at each one of these categories and prepare accordingly for each one of those. However, that's not a very robust list in terms of all the different things you can prepare for. So I've added things to the hierarchy like energy, finances, tools, security, communications, travel planning, etc. So we're going to go through a lot of these different segments. And so here's how you do this. If you've really done hardly any preparations at all, or even if you've done a lot, this is still a good exercise to see exactly where you're at. Take these big buckets and then start to tease them out in terms of a hierarchy. And you'll see some examples like shelter. Okay, well, shelter can mean a whole bunch of different things. So our main grouping is shelter. But then beneath that, you're going to say, okay, what about shelter on your person? So like clothing, footwear, bug spray, etc. But then there's your home. What are all the considerations that you need for your home in terms of shelter? Heating, cooling, security. Or what about if you're displaced from your home and now you do need a bug out bag? What do you need for shelter there? Tent, bedding, sleeping bag, etc., etc. So you see how it goes down tier after tier after tier. And you can see any one of these: shelter, water, food, energy, finances, tools, security. All these things can have multiple different tiers. And so you look at this big hierarchy diagram, and there's going to be a lot of overlap, as you'll see, between a lot of these sections. But it can help collect your thoughts in terms of where you might be deficient and where you need to work on some things. So we're going to go through these categories. Air, I think, is the easiest. Masks, not just for the current situation and viruses and things like that, but some other big things. There's been a lot of forest fires, major forest fires. Masks can help in that situation. If you live in a desert region, dust storms, it can help in that. Just thinking about working in a shop, woodworking, sanding, things like that, where you're forced to sort of do your own handiwork. It could be helpful there as well. I sort of felt bad for all the people who needed particulate masks whenever this whole thing happened, because Lowe's and Home Depot and all the places that generally had those were completely sold out. So the people that needed them for their professions had nothing. So again, masks, you could extrapolate this to start talking about NBC, nuclear, biological, chemical stuff. But again, this is just general preparedness. I don't think anyone needs to go down the route of NBC filters and things like that. Shelter. So I alluded to how we might think about breaking this one down. So on your person, clothing, especially for kids, so that you can prepare like a year and ahead. This is something that I'm going to do with my children here soon. You want to make sure that they've got good clothing for winter, good waterproof clothing like rain jackets and things like that, and wicking clothing. So that's the most important. Protection from water and protection from winter and cold. Particularly important in the clothing aspect is footwear. This is, again, what I'm going to do with my children. These boots here, Kamik men's Forester insulated rubber boots, are the best thing ever. I mean, I probably wear these every single day. It doesn't matter whether it's summer or winter. They're completely waterproof. They have like a wool liner in them that is wicking and keeps your feet dry. But again, the keeping care of your feet with multiple changes of socks, the right type of wicking merino wool type of material, and that they're waterproof, it's critical. So what I'm going to do is, my kids are quickly outgrowing their things. I'm buying all my kids a pair. They have children's Kamik boots as well. A pair of these size in advance. And they're just so good. And we go through them. They use them all the time. Even now in the summer, just with all the mud and wetness and everything, we use these all the time. So that's another thing, is with your preps, you can think about it two ways. One, if you're going to use them and they're not going to go to waste, great. That's the best circumstance. But two, if you happen to store something up and you never use it, and it's maybe something that expires, again, this is really insurance policy. I have insurance on my car. I have insurance on my health. I have insurance for family and death and home and everything. And I really haven't cashed out on any of them. It's sort of money that's just gone to the insurance companies. If you do happen to have things that go expired, yeah, you might feel a little bit dumb, but it's just like any other insurance. It's good that you didn't need it. Try to make sure you use it so that nothing's wasted. But if it happens to, don't feel silly, don't feel dumb. Preparedness is a very prudent thing to do. And just think about it as insurance. All right, so those Kamik boots are incredible. All right, next one. Sun protection. So just one thing, make sure you have a full brim hat for shade, especially if you're thinking about working in the garden long hours, or Yeah, if you look at what's happening all around the world, refugees, you'd hate to think that you're in a situation where you're a refugee having to flee. But again, if you are, that's good to think about sun protection. Good sleeping bag. Also waterproof bivy covers. Thinking about mobile shelters. Actually, I don't even know why I put this on the on you. This should be in a different section here. But sleeping bag and bivy cover, waterproof bivy cover, that's good. And talked about bug spray, I think. Bug spray or bug netting, especially in the summertime. If you've ever watched the survival series, that's one of the main things that gets people is the bugs. I mean, the bugs will just tear you apart. So, again, bug spray will run out. Still probably good to have a couple cans, but better is if you have, long sleeve, loose clothing, long pants, and then for your face, you could have like a boonie hat and a bug net. All right, so still on the topic of shelter, that was just some ideas for on your person. But regarding your home, okay, so your main residence, you need to think about how to heat that if you're not able to. So many, many years ago, I bought a wood stove. That gives us a lot of peace of mind. And generally, it's like around 3 cords for an entire season. That's a unit of measure for how much wood. It's a lot of wood if you're going to go just solely wood heating your home. Not everyone's able to financially afford that. So another option is if you buy one of these small camping stoves. It's actually called hot tent camping. Or you can see here in this picture, this person has a hammock with a tarp over it, and they've got this stove there, and you can actually go into the dead of winter camping and have it be balmy inside your little tent. This one, there's some that are a lot cheaper than this. This one's $300, but you can probably find them on eBay for $150. But still, really good to have one of these for portable use. They're still heavy. I mean, you're not going to go backpacking with these things. You would need like a dolly, or not a dolly, but you would need like some type of cart to have this much weight. But it is good if you have this in your home and you just section everyone off to like one room and have this vented out of a window. This is a moderately cheap way to ensure that you have a way to heat your home and not go the route of a 6,000 plus wood stove installation. This is much more practical. And again, you could put this in your car if you had to bug out, and it's just good to have. And doesn't take as much fuel either. So again, to get a wood stove up to temperature and keep it at that temperature so you don't have creosote forming, you have to use a lot more wood than you would for one of these little guys. So that's another benefit. Another one, we use this every single winter. Family loves it. Again, use your preps. Don't just keep them all stored away for a rainy day. Kerosene heaters. This one's about $140. You might be able to find it cheaper on eBay. Along with 5-gallon jugs of kerosene. This is just a very warm heat. It's a very moist, warm heat. 5 gallons will last us around 3 days or more, depending on how much you space it out. But we use this to supplement our heating all the time. And one key thing about this, you should have a window cracked when you do it. We also have carbon monoxide detectors just in case, but never had an issue, never had one go off. One of the keys about this is you always make sure you light it outside and you let it burn for about 3 to 5 minutes, and then you bring it in the house. And then when you're ready to shut it off, you carry it outside the house and then you shut it off. Because if you either start it in the house, or especially if you shut it off in the house, there will be noxious fumes all throughout your house and it'll be horrible. But while it's burning at full temp, it's a clean burn. I mean, there's really not much of a smell at all. So you'll just need to know where to get the kerosene. Don't buy kerosene from box stores like Lowe's or whatever. You will have to do some research and find gas stations where you can pump the kerosene. Because the big box stores will sell it like 10, 20 times the price of what you can get it at a gas station. I think it's, well, I haven't checked since all the prices rose, but it was about $4 before everything happened here with the prices. About $4 a gallon. So it's a little pricier than gasoline. All right. Oh, jeez. And I apologize for that. That's a bad habit of mine. I say geez. And so some people say I'm blaspheming the Lord. I don't intend to, but again, I know it upsets some people, so I need to work on that. So my apologies. Mason jar kerosene lamps. So this is another thing. If you heat one of these bad boys up, it'll heat up an entire home like really, really fast. Now, again, that's burning a lot of fuel as well. So if you don't have the luxury of having a whole bunch of 5-gallon kerosene containers in your home and you just want to have like a moderate heat, you might consider just buying mason jars and putting kerosene in those and sealing them up. And you can use these kerosene wicks. And with a couple of these in a single room, you could definitely heat up your room just fine, like just a single room, and definitely manage the use of fuel a lot more efficiently. And these are only 10, $11, and those mason jars are not very expensive either. So that's another option. Mr. Buddy propane heater. So if you've got some propane stocked up, again, you need to make sure that if you're running this indoors, that you crack a window. And it is safe for indoor use as long as you crack a window. But those are some heating options for you. Cooling, this is more important for elderly, and we're still on the topic of shelter. Window air conditioning units, they do consume a lot of energy, but I think it's good to have one just in case, because you don't know if the power's going to go out, and it's good to have one. We use one as well. And if it goes out, well, you're really sort of stuck. The only options you have are like fans, misters, cooling cloths, things like that. If you're in the desert region, though, there are these things called evaporation air conditioners, where you're just putting water into the air through a wet filter, and that will actually help keep you cool. But again, it's only in dry and arid regions. So cooling, I don't put a whole lot of emphasis on that because really it's heat. Heat is the really big one for wintertime, obviously, unless you're a more tropical climate. And then cooling, again, is more for those that are susceptible, like the elderly or people with conditions. Still on shelter, think about security. So just some examples. It's good to have extra bars on your doors. We use some routinely, but if things start to get bad in your area, it'd be good to have this. Another really cheap option is these face plates for your bolts and your doorknobs. They typically have these tiny little, maybe inch long screws that come out really easily if someone tries to pound on your door. Replace them with about a 3-inch screw. And if you look on YouTube of videos, just with this one simple chain, literally pennies, it is incredibly different. A lot of people can't even get the door down just with that small change. So that is something you should just immediately do, regardless of the situation at hand. Some other things, again, if power does go out, and I put a note here. This did happen to me and happened to all of us really maybe within the past year. I use the Ring app just because of its convenience. I know that it's not going to work if there is like a collapse type of scenario. But the Ring app did collapse because of who knows what, maybe hacking or I don't know. But you couldn't really access your cameras. You couldn't do anything. It was completely just useless. So it's good to have some type of off-grid, if you will, security measures. And so here's just a couple of ideas where these are all battery powered. Here's a Wedge doorstop security alarm that had really good reviews on Amazon. You just put this slightly wedged underneath your door, and if someone opens the door, then the alarm goes off. There's other options as well, which are pretty cheap. Here's a 4-pack of just wireless home security alarms. So again, these just stick on. They got the 2 magnets, they separate, alarm goes off. And these are all the alarming devices on the unit itself. So security, I think, is going to be a really big one, especially as inflation rises and there's going to be food riots and things like that. There's already crime is way, way up on the rise. If there is a power outage and your home security setup, if you have one, isn't powered up and you have no backup, it's good to have these battery operated units. because security is definitely going to be paramount. There's also some that are motion sensing. This is one that had really good ratings. I haven't used it. I've thought about buying one just to see, but I'll let you know if I think it's worth it. But this is a motion sensor alarm that has 500 foot to a 4th mile range, depending on which model you get. But it's about $50 per unit, which is pretty much average for any type of sensor or security system that you see on Amazon or likewise. So just some ideas for security for your home. But then your mobile shelter situation. So again, I talked about sleeping pad, rain poncho, windbreaker, sleeping bag, ground cover tarp, your tent or hammock. I really love the hammocks. And then security while you're in a mobile bug out situation. We'll cover that in the security section. So again, there's lots of overlaps, as I mentioned before. I do have fire in here as a section, but it could be whittled into some of the other sections as well. Just make sure you have extra matches, lighters. There's a ferro rod, which is a device that you can use to make sparks, fire starters, and char cloth. If you don't know any of these, what these things are, like char cloth, you can just go ahead and look it up. Well, we'll cover fire more in the energy section. Water. Okay, water is a big bucket, and then tearing that down to multiple different sections. While you think about water storage, at all of our grocery stores, there's 2.5 to 5 gallon jugs. You can pick up a couple of those just to have. Those are actually really good if you were to have to bug out, to just grab a 2.5 or 5 gallon bucket, a jug, and you're just good to go. It's just very convenient. Or for long term, you could find on Facebook Marketplace, there's lots of food grade, and you have to make sure it's food grade. There's lots of chemicals that have been stored in these buckets that you don't want to get. Make sure you get 55 gallon white or blue food grade buckets from Facebook Marketplace. Clean them out real good, and you can store water in those as well. And there's ways to maintain that water with like tablets or bleach. You can look up how to keep the water fresh in those. Then there's also going to be water collection. So do you have a rain harvesting system like rain barrels, particularly for your garden? Is there any lakes, streams, pools, spas that you can use for water collection? Then there's treatment as a category. There's physical filtration. Highly recommend getting a Berkey, but everything's getting very expensive now. Or you can do a DIY Berkey where you use 5 gallon buckets. It's very easy to do. And you just use the Berkey filtering apparatus and you just drill holes and do it that way. Cheaper options are Life Straw, and they're mobile as well. Berkey's not the best for mobile applications, but Life Straw is good for your bug out bag. Mini Sawyer's another brand that's good for bug out bag, and MSR. Those are probably the top 3 that I like. There's also chemical treatments, iodine tabs, bleach. I would really only prefer these for mobile use. Or again, if you're trying to store water for the long term, you might think about what percentage of bleach to use on that water. But that's like the water section. Food. So I don't know what's up with my computer doing that. But food, we're gonna think about this in terms of food storage, and then how to process the food, how to preserve the food. There's a whole bunch of things in here that I want to discuss as soon as my computer will allow me to get to it. So food storage. If you haven't done any food storage at all, you want to first look at the bulk grains. That's going to make up the majority of your diet. So rice, beans, wheats, oat, etc. If you have celiacs or something else, you will have to look, and I don't think you're going to get certified gluten-free in bulk. It may be out there. Might be difficult, but you probably just want to just focus on the rice and the oats and just do the best that you can. There's a way to store these in Mylar bags. You can look that up on YouTube. And some people put the bulk grain in the Mylar bag, put in oxygen absorbers, seal it up, and put it in 5 gallon buckets. Honestly, my opinion is the plastic buckets, which are about 5 to 6 gallons, it wastes a whole ton of Mylar space. The best thing to do, because there'll be like a third of your bag that you can't really even fill once you put it in the plastic bucket. And it's just a waste with how expensive the Mylar is. Best thing to do is fill up your Mylar just in its rectangular shape with maybe a fifth of the top of the bag left. Put in your oxygen absorbers, seal it up, and then just stack those in Rubbermaid containers so that they're fairly protected from like mice and rodents. That's the most optimal and effective use of funds to store these up. And then you can just stack the Rubbermaid containers up. After you get your bulk grains, then you can start supplementing with other things. So canned food. You could have 1 can of soup and then serve everyone rice, and just 1 can of soup goes a lot longer. Once you split it up with all the bulk grains. But canned food, remember, best by dates are just best by dates. You can go past them. And I would even argue that if it goes way past the best by date and you open it up and it's not even palatable, if you know anything about hunting, you could use it as bait, honestly. You could use it for fishing bait. You could use it for hunting bait. I mean, just think about reusing these resources. Freeze-dried food, that's obviously a good option, but it is getting so expensive. And honestly, with the times that we're in and seeing how fast things are moving, I don't think we need 20, 30-year shelf life. I don't know exactly how fast things are going to unravel, but every day it seems like it's getting a lot closer. So if you have the means to get that, great. If you don't really have the means, I would still suggest buying a couple of these for your bug out bag, just because they don't weigh a whole lot. But again, they're getting very expensive. You could also get some of these pre-made mixes. So whereas these bulk grains are all singular type of grains, you can get bulk like dehydrated soup mixes. So those are really good. It has all the spices and everything in it. If you just look it up on Google or Amazon, you can find some. And they have like really big bags of them too. Talking about spices, here's a really good site. There is food lethargy, so if you just store rice with nothing else, that can really get to you. It'd be nice to have some spices along with it. Spices really have long X dating. You don't really have to do a whole lot with them. But I use herbalcom.com, sort of funny name. It does not look like a legit website. It looks like you're going to get ripped off, but it's legit. So you can buy like pounds of any spice that you want, and it tells you what country it's coming from. And it's way cheaper than those tiny little things that you get at the grocery store. And I think it's even cheaper than Costco or Sam's Club. So check out that site. For bulk grains, I've used Azure Standard. I just recently used it. A lot of homesteaders use it. The catch is, I think they only ship to your area once a month. So they have like a huge semi truck, and everyone's order in the vicinity comes on one truck. So the shipping costs are like really low. So yeah, I think Azure Standard is a really good place to buy bulk. I've also heard some people use Webstaurant. I haven't ordered from them, but I think it's a legit website where you can buy in bulk. But then also, I noted here, portable food storage for your bug out bag. Also get some energy bars. And again, the freeze-dried food. There are a lot of stories when the whole thing happened in this country where people were fleeing the war. They had kids with them, and literally everyone was using the highways, and people were stuck on the highways, and they couldn't get food for like 3 days. So their kids were starving. They were starving. Yeah, it's good to have a bug out bag. You hope you never need it, but it's good to have a little bit of food in there. So that was just food storage. You should also think about food procurement. So I just have livestock in here just because I know some people do that. We're not going to talk about livestock. If you're already at the point of having livestock, you're probably pretty good on everything else, and I don't need to share anything with you. But livestock obviously is a source of food procurement. Lots of people getting into raising chickens and eggs that never did so before. Wild game hunting. This is something you could have on hand. So a pellet gun is invaluable, in my opinion. You can get a true BB gun, or probably even better, there's like .177 or 22 caliber pellet guns. And a lot of the 22 caliber pellet guns are near as powerful as some 22 caliber rifles. And the ammo is just extremely cheap. You buy it in like 500 round tins for like 10 bucks or something like that. But if you think about squirrels and rabbits, most of the game out there is small game. It really is. And so I think having a pellet gun is invaluable. I don't think a lot of people are going to get into this, but there's snares or conibear traps. You need to know how to use those, especially conibear traps can be pretty dangerous. But there's also like small animal live traps. So again, just some ideas, thinking outside of the box. We had a squirrel problem, so the name's sort of funny. I bought this. It's called the Squirrelinator. The thing works really well. And there's some people in there that said they've caught like hundreds of squirrels over the course of a year with this thing. It's just a trap door, and you put food in the middle. But again, if it comes down to the worst of it, one of these could be very valuable as well. So fishing, that's another thing. Having cast nets if you live by an ocean or lake. Fishing poles, traps. Particularly with traps, I have one of these in my bug out bag. Gill nets. I think a lot of places have them as illegal, because if you leave them in a waterway, the fish get tangled in these, and their gills, they're called gill nets because the fish gills get stuck in the net and they die. That's why they're illegal. If they get left out there, it'll just destroy the wildlife. But for survival, having one of these, especially if you're near waterways, is a really good idea. And it's not too expensive. There's probably cheaper options than this too if you search on eBay. And last section for food procurement, and I'm not going to get into it because you could think about if you tier just gardening out, you can think about all the different things that you might want to need in terms of like fertilizers and greenhouses and seeds and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's food processing and preservation. So this is an area that I was deficient in and started, shoring some things up. If you have grains other than like rice, you may need a grain mill. Some of them are cheaper. You can find them. Some of them can be a little bit expensive, near like $100+. But a grain mill for meats, having a knife set. For preservation, a dehydrator, but again, that runs on electricity, so I don't know how useful that would be if we have energy issues. Vacuum sealer, very important, especially if you have small game. It takes the gamey taste out of the meat if you put the meat in there for about a week under refrigerated conditions. But we use vacuum sealer all the time, so again, keep in mind, you only want to buy things that you use. It just makes sense to use things so you know how to use it when a survival situation might happen. But food, vacuum storage, let's see, where did I leave off before my page left? And pressure canner. I've been doing lots of canning lately. It's not USDA approved, but I've been canning butter, been canning meats, been canning all sorts of things. So it's very easy to do. Get the ball canning books. You just follow the recipe. If you can just follow a recipe, you're fine. Because there are minimum pressures and times and things you need to do to properly ensure that your canning doesn't have botulism or that your glass doesn't break. But again, it's very easy. Don't be intimidated by it. But a pressure canner for preservation is key. In terms of food cooking, and before the past 2 years, the issue that happened, I was really deficient in this, but I started shoring it up. Lots of people get all this food, but they don't think about how they're going to cook it. So, me personally, I picked up a couple of the propane tanks from the grocery store and got a single propane camping stove, single burner camping stove. So that's one way. I also have a small rocket stove. This one, it's a little pricey, but versus our large wood stove, because again, that's going to take a lot of energy to heat up to the point of where you can cook on it. And if it's in the summertime, you don't want to be cooking yourself out of your house because of the heat that's emanating from that wood stove. It would be better if you had like a small rocket stove, and you can build these yourself for super cheap. It'd be better just to have something small like this, so that you can just cook easily and efficiently and not have to use a ton of wood. So a rocket stove is a good option. Solar ovens are also good options, but in all honesty, they're incredibly expensive, especially now. It would also be good to have a cast iron Dutch oven or some type of pot that can act like an oven, closed oven, and in addition to your just skillets. For mobile situations, make sure you have camping stove and pot for mobile cooking. And then also, here's another idea. You won't be able to find these except for on eBay, and they're way overpriced. But in Africa, there's something called the Wonder Bag, and it's this agency that was trying to help with issues of energy insecurity in that region. And so in order to conserve energy for cooking, all it is an insulated bag. So they cook their food in a pot over fire, and then they put the pot in this insulated bag, and they use it just like a slow cooker. So the insulated bag keeps in all the heat. They don't have to expend more wood or propane or whatever fuel they're using, and they just let it sit there just for several hours. You could probably make one of these yourself. It doesn't even have to be with fabric. You could probably think about some ideas, but energy conservation, I think, is going to be a big thing, and this would be a good way to do it for your food preps. Another section: health, hygiene, and medical. So getting into some touchy subjects here. This is actually one that has a current shortage, talking about a tampon shortage. But there are, and I'm not the one that should be talking about this, but there are reusable feminine products, these cups and things like that the ladies can look into. There's also reusable baby diapers. I have used these. They've come a long way. It wasn't fun, but we did use it for 2 out of our 4 children. But if you have a baby, just think, parents really should be on heightened alert that have babies because of the formula shortage. There may be diaper shortages. Who knows, right? And besides, you're saving money, and it's not that bad. Honestly, if you're someone that's watching this video and you choose to try to look into this, they actually have these liners that go in the diaper for the messy stuff, where you just remove the liner, and it's really not that bad because cleaning the cloth is just a lot easier. So, TMI for some, but let's move on. Toothbrushes, toothpaste, soap, bleach, and other disinfectants. Again, that's all part of the hygiene aspect of this. A number 2 waste bucket with plenty of grocery bags and TP. There's also DIY detergent. The one I like the best is if you check out the channel Prepper Princess. She has this laundry make your own soap tips and tricks, where you can just buy some Arm & Hammer soap along with Zote, and it's like 3 ingredients, but you can make a 5-gallon bucket of detergent for super, super cheap. So detergent for your clothes, and you can wash it in a 5-gallon bucket with just a stick. Basic medication, the real key things that you want to have on hand. And again, like Sri Lanka is running out of medication. And if there is an issue with the dragon country, a lot of the medical active ingredients and excipients that are used to make all these drugs come out of that country. And so if they go into Taiwan and there's supply chain shortages because of that, it's good to have a box or 2 of these on hand just in case. But medication for diarrhea, medication for vomiting, if you happen to be able to get a prescription for Zofran, and doctors will just, if you say you're throwing up and you can't stop, Zofran is like antibiotics. They prescribe it all the time. Zofran is just an amazing wonder drug with vomiting, and at least everyone in my family has not really had any side effects from it. Antibiotics, obviously, if you can get your hands on some, there's some prepper channels now where there are some online doctors that will gouge you in terms of the price, but they will write you antibiotic prescriptions without you actually being sick. So that's something you can look into. Allergy, I would say have some Benadryl in bulk. It's literally like 100 tablets that you can get under $10. Pain relief, I think sleep aids might be helpful. Caffeine pills could be helpful if you need to stay awake. And then also for digestive issues, Bragg's apple cider vinegar, when I have my autoimmune condition, does absolute wonders. And it's an ancient remedy as well. and it's just awesome. And I'd only use the Brags. That was really the only one that I could tolerate in terms of brands. Some other things, temporary teeth fillings, tourniquets, I think is a really critical thing to have. General bandages, hydrogen peroxide, alcohol, iodine, especially for cleaning out wounds and disinfecting, clotting gauze. But clotting gauze does have expiration dates on it, so just keep that in mind. And then they offer things, suture kits. There's a lot of YouTube videos on how to do a variety of different sutures if you're comfortable, or a stapler. I'd hate to even think about the use of a stapler, but I have a couple sutures on hand just in case. Security, big Christian topics, talking about firearms. We're not going to get into that today. I just want to say that's not just for humans. Obviously, it can be for hunting. But there's also situations where, again, if we're getting, and we know per Revelation, like, things are going to get real bad. And there's also, talk about in Revelation about how the beasts of the earth come to devour the flesh of the wicked, things like that. And so you may be thinking about the time in which that happens, but if there really is collapse, and especially pet food, that's something I didn't mention in these notes, storing up pet food, there's going to be a lot of people that can't care for their animals, and they just let them go. And so, if you are out, keep in mind that a firearm is not just protection against humans. There could be situations with roaming animals or dogs. And so I think, there is still a relevancy for firearms, regardless of the whole self-defense with firearms Christian debate. I did mention up in the shelter aspect, when I started talking about mobile shelters and your bug out plan, I think this is incredibly important, but talking about alarm devices for mobile sake. I have a bunch of these, and there's all different varieties. You can see this one is made by a mousetrap, or made through a mousetrap. There's also some that use just the cap of a grenade. They take off, obviously, the dangerous part, and the pin part they turn into a perimeter alarm. So this one here, someone trips a wire and the mousetrap goes down on a 22 caliber blank. Makes a really loud sound. I think these are really good to have, just, trip lines if there are lots of things going on, and you want to have some security and forewarning of people that might be like coming to your property, or you're mobile, and some people, or even animals, bears, coming near your tent. I think this is a good option. So that's one option. You can see here, Fifth Ops is like an official company which makes these. Not only do they have the 22 caliber ones, but they also have 12 gauge. That would be really loud. But same principle. There's also electronic ones. Probably wouldn't fare that well in the rain. But here's one is where these are just personal security devices where you're holding it, someone goes after you, you pull the top pin, and it makes an alarm sound. You can see how this would work, where you would just use a nail on this end, nail it into a tree, put a wire or some cord on the end of this one, tie it to another tree, someone walks through it, pulls it out. There's your electronic alarm system. So these are all good options in terms of security, in terms of alarm devices. And I just put this in here again. If you're even thinking about this, you're probably way more advanced and don't even need to be listening to this broadcast. But they do offer some really cheap, I'm not going to say really cheap, but in the relative, there is some night vision that is relatively cheap. Thermal, not so much, but night vision, they get some like low grade ones that are relatively cheap compared to like the thousands of dollars for some of the advanced ones. That it can really be a game changer, just in being able to see in the night. So if you're someone that's blessed with finances, maybe that's something you look into. Speaking about finances, people have asked me a lot in terms of what do we do? Because you should not be just blowing all your funds on preps. Even though it looks like there's a whole collapse of the financial system, what do we do with all this extra cash? Some people talk about cryptocurrency, gold, silver, things like that. Cryptocurrency, I'm not going to get into it, but I think this is overall a setup with a lot of these, like Tether. I'll have to share some thoughts on that, where I think it's all manipulated. And of course, if you look into not just Bitcoin, but a lot of these other cryptocurrencies, and you look at like the top holders, the top holders, I mean, they control a lot of it. So, I mean, I know there was this ideal of it being like the people's currency, but to think that it's never going to be manipulated, it is, and it can be. So I don't personally subscribe to crypto. If you think it's worth it, though, make sure you have what's called a cold wallet. Trezor is a good brand, and that's where, you know, a lot of these crypto exchanges like Coinbase, you can store money in them just like an online account. But if they fold, I think they have very little regulation. You could have all your funds just gone. So just like storing cash in a safe, you would store your crypto in a cold wallet, like a little USB cold wallet. So that's just an option there. Gold and silver, I think it's good to have. How much? That's completely up to you. There's lots of arguments for and against it. But for me, I've stopped participating in 401k and IRA. I've stopped participating in the markets completely. Long time ago. Long time ago. And so the gold and silver that I have is literally just part of my retirement plan, or, you know, money for my kids. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to retire. Honestly, you know, we think worse things are going to happen before that happens. I think it is good to have cash on hand. Right now, even in Shanghai, there are bank runs because of issues with the banks. We've seen this also in Greece, and there's some financial experts that are saying there may be bank runs in the future. And then obviously hard assets, whatever you think that may be. Obviously things that you can use are better, but hard assets are yours. They're in your control. All right, couple more things here. Energy. So you can think about this in terms of what energy sources. Electrical. You can think about getting a small solar generator with panels, enough to charge your phone or maybe just a small laptop at minimum. Make sure you also get rechargeable batteries with the chargers. Think about chemical, gasoline or diesel. You have a couple jugs on hand. Also stabilizers for the gasoline. Again, the kerosene jugs for the kerosene heater that I talked about above. Also good to have maybe a couple propane tanks for that single burner camping stove. This was an area that I was very deficient in, and a lot of things that people overlook. Environmental type of sources of energy, seasoned wood for your wood stove and things of that nature. And it has to be seasoned. It has to be dried out, or it won't work that well. So that's just some thoughts about energy. Tools. This is not an all-encompassing section. I just thought of a bunch of random things that I thought were helpful. Just make sure you have flashlights, tarred twine. I should have had a picture of this, but look up tarred twine on Amazon. This is way better and cheaper than paracord. It's a lot thinner. Some of it can be just as strong or stronger. And again, it is cheaper. A good knife. I like Moraneve. It's a very good company. Cold Steel's pretty good, or Essie. Those are all brands that I have. It's also good to have a handsaw. I like the Silky handsaws for your bug out bag, but if you're really talking about cutting wood for a wood stove, having a big crosscut saw is better. Have a good felling axe as well as a maul axe for splitting the firewood. And then also don't forget about a good knife sharpening block, and there's also files for axes. So I mean, you could think about lots and lots of tools, especially if you think about building a variety of things. Here's another one. I've mentioned it in years past. Every time we see these refugee crises, they start erecting razor wire and barbed wire fences. If you're trying to, for whatever reason, escape with you and your family, it's really good to have some small bolt cutters. I originally had, it was maybe like $10 from Harbor Freight, these 8-inch bolt cutters. But there's a channel called Southern Prepper One. He uses these, and I bought a pair. They're called Nipex, but they are bolt cutters as well, and fencing cutters. It is expensive for a tool such as this, but super good quality. I actually use this on all my gardening fencing. Again, use your preps. Buy what you use, not just things that are completely being stored up that you're never going to use. But this could help you get out of Dodge out of one of those situations. So just a couple of tool ideas. Communications, not going to really spend a whole lot of time on here. Family radio service, FRS walkie-talkies are good. We use them with our kids when they're running around the neighborhood. Ham radio, obviously a lot of knowledge, and just that is a subject in and of itself. You have to take tests and be certified and have like a certificate and a calling ID in order to participate in ham radio. But that's something you might be able to look into. And then like designating meeting locations with your family, just some things to think about in terms of communications. Travel planning, this is a big one. And the reason why I focus on this is I haven't seen a lot of prepper channels talk about it, but I've brought it up maybe about 5 different times. Offline maps. It's such a luxury to have Google Maps, Apple Maps, all this stuff. And you think if there was no internet access or power went out, or maybe you're even in a remote part of the country where you're not getting a signal, offline maps are absolutely critical. Paper maps are great, but again, the paper maps just don't have the amount of data that an electronic version would have, just because there's various scales, and the paper you'd be holding a book. So this is the current app that I have. It's called OSMAND. I don't know if it's available on Apple, but I know it's on Android, and it's free. I think it's free. Don't quote me on that. But it stores all the offline maps with incredible detail. So I feel fairly secure. Again, even if we're just on a road trip and we lose signal, I'm prepared. It's about everyday preparedness, Boy Scouts type stuff. There's also ways, if you Google just to search offline maps, I think Google and Apple Maps both have options of downloading maps. So that's an option as well. Or there's a whole variety of, like there's Garmin Basecamp. There's a whole bunch of other different applications where you can store offline maps. Just search this in the YouTube, or not YouTube, but on Google, and you can find all sorts of stuff. In the YouTube description box, I also have this Build Your Own Bug Out Bag Ideas. It's a very old article. A lot of the links don't even work anymore that link back to Amazon, but talking about a bug out bag, it may give you some ideas if you choose to go on and visit there. Talking about travel planning some more, emergency road supplies. So getting stuck out of the snow and mud, there are these really tough tracks that you can put underneath your tires in order to get some traction. I think those are helpful, especially depending on where you live. I have a high lift jack. It's basically a jack that you use for Jeep Wranglers and other off-road stuff, but you can also use it as a winch. It's just something that I've had on hand, and I've used it for pulling out stumps. I've used it on my Jeep that I no longer have, which is really sad, but at least I don't have to pay that crazy gas anymore. And you can use it as a winch. It's just a good tool to have. And then this, I've actually used the portable air pump a ton, but there are portable air pumps for your car where you just stick it into the cigarette lighter, and it's just an air pump to fill your tires up. And so I have that, and it's always in my car, as well as a flat fix. So these are tarred twine that you basically stuff in the hole if you run over a nail or something, and it'll last a pretty long time. You should probably get it professionally fixed, but this is good to have just as a general preparedness thing for your road kit. Also, I don't know, I have this brand. I thought it was all right, but there might be better ones for the air pumps. But just do some searching on Google and Amazon. You can probably find a brand that you like. So just a couple ideas for the travel planning. And then lastly, so we're finally at the end here, community, mental, and emotional. So community, I just want to make mention, don't become unequally yoked with the world regarding prepping. It's sort of what's happening with regards to like all the tyranny. Like a lot of Christians are becoming unequally yoked with the world, mostly conservative right, because the conservative right is against their enemies, so I might as well pair up with them. The same type of thing can happen with prepping, is start to get really yoked up with people that aren't saved. Just make sure you don't get unequally yoked. I wish I had it here. I thought I did. It's such a good verse. I might as well just pull it up here for you. I posted it yesterday on my Facebook On Point Preparedness page. But the scripture is, if I can get it here. Here it is. Psalm 44. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not turn to the proud, to those who go astray after a lie. So, talk about community. If you have like men or women's Bible study, it's really good to, have community with like believers. Family pictures. I think that's something that a lot of men underestimate. It's good to have those in your bug out bag, especially. Candy can definitely be a morale booster, especially for like me and my kids. I put some candy in my bug out bag just in case. It's actually sort of a sad thing to think about because we know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen. We know there's going to be children involved, and so you hate to think about things like this. But it's good to mentally process these things now. That's why I actually have this down here, mental rehearsal, which we'll get to here. Essential oils, sometimes those scents can be comforting, so that's another thing that might help boost morale. And then books for knowledge. Definitely try to collect books in case you don't have access to the internet or whatnot. There could probably be a whole lot more in this section, but we're already about an hour and 15 minutes, so I don't want to take up any more of your time. But let's just end here. This is a good place to stop. Mental rehearsal. Talking about faith, community, mental, emotional preparedness. I fellowship with a lot of people that are pre-trib believers. Me personally, I don't know if this is the right term. I don't really like getting involved with labels, but I believe we will go through tribulation. I believe we will go also through great tribulation, but we are definitely not going into wrath. I think that the church is raptured prior to the wrath of God. And my fear is, I think if I can sort of sum up like a pre-trib thought versus a not, if you don't believe in that. Pre-tribs, they're very joyful and very focused on the Lord, and are excited about his return. And, if they look at those that don't believe in that, they'll be like, some of the people that believe we have to go through tribulation, they're stressed, they're anxious. Again, the pre-trib people might look at that and say, it's just not right. You shouldn't have that anxiety. You need to think more about the glorious return of the Lord than all these bad things that are going to happen. And so that could be true in an effect, right? That, we don't want to focus on all the bad things. We really should keep our eyes on the Lord and focus on his return and be joyful about that. But on the opposite side, there are a lot of people that are so dogmatic about pre-trib that they don't think anything is going to happen. That the tribulation isn't going to touch them at all. And then so my fear for them, and this is where we just have conversation back and forth. I'm not going to break fellowship because of this difference. My fear is if you haven't like mentally rehearsed and prayed beforehand, and also done some preparedness, if you had the means to, if this hits as bad as a lot of people are saying it's going to hit, I don't want that to upset anyone's faith on the pre-trib side. Because I know there will be, in fact, some people that are so dogmatic about pre-trib that they will feel abandoned, And I don't want them to feel abandoned. There are some people that I know, like there's some people that believe in pre-trib, and they said, if it doesn't happen, I'm still going to trust in the Lord. Well, that's great. That's great. They're mentally rehearsing it ahead of time as their belief is pre-trib. They don't agree with my position. That's fine. We're still fellowshipping. And if it doesn't happen according to what they think, well, then they're like, I understand it's a possibility. I'm still going to trust in the Lord. Fine. But I really do worry about folks where, you would feel abandoned. You feel confused. And on top of that, terrible things are going on all around you. And I don't want that to be something that shipwrecks someone's faith. That could shipwreck someone's faith. So mental rehearsal, regardless of your theological or eschatological belief on this, we should all do a mental rehearsal, saying like, if this happened, what would I do? Because I mean, it's nice and cozy to be sitting here in America or Canada or Australia or Great Britain or whatever, South Africa, any country really, Germany, Australia, and we're still living in relative peace. But there's Christians in that country that just got attacked. There's in South Africa, there's lots of persecution down there. There's Christians that are going through some really hard things right now. And so I don't really think that we're spared from it. I think a lot of the scripture points to the fact that we will have great trouble. And again, we should be in prayer over this coming up to those days, but we should also just be mentally rehearsing this, preparing ourselves and continually conversing with the Lord over this to provide His protection. But if we are slated to go into captivity, if some people are slated to go to the sword, and there will be martyrs, that we just continue to pray for guidance and we trust in Him. So this mental rehearsal in faith, I think, is very, very important. And so we'll end there. I'd ask you to do a mental rehearsal of really everything that we've covered here today, but more importantly than any of the tips and tricks, I'd really like you to focus on the scriptures. And most importantly, do not fall in bondage to your preps. I would say I fell in bondage to my preps at least a couple times in this journey where it became way too consuming of my time. Probably bought some things I probably shouldn't have spent money on, But now that I'm growing in maturity and having done this for like 10 years, I'm just conversing with the Lord a lot more, trying to be more patient in terms of, determining what I should buy, what I shouldn't buy. Still having issues with that, especially because of everything that we're seeing in the news. People are telling you stock up to the rafters. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's right for you. So you need to do all of this in accordance with faith and a good conscience. But first and foremost, seek the kingdom, and then these things will be added to you. So we will end there. Hope you enjoy this. This is Mike with On Point Preparedness. Again, my affiliate link is below if you choose to use that for any items that you thought might be helpful. And then also that whole bug out bag idea, the ideas, that link is in the YouTube description as well. And if you don't know anything about the law of liberty in Christ Jesus, if you search my YouTube channel for When Christian Liberty Kills Sins of Conscience, you'll find that video. I think that will bless you with really good spiritual knowledge on the topic. So I am headed to bed. Hope you all enjoy this. See you later.